They called him the most dangerous man on the planet, a fighter whose punches could end a match before it even began. But behind that unstoppable power, there was a boy who never truly stopped fighting, not against others, but against himself. Because the truth is, Mike Tyson's greatest opponent was never the man standing in front of him. Section 1. The ferocious facade, building the myth. In the 1980s, the world saw a storm rise from the streets of Brooklyn, a young man with fire in his eyes and hunger in his fists. Mike Tyson didn't just win fights, he devoured them. He walked into the ring like a force of nature, silent, focused, terrifying. No flashy robes, no smiles, no small talk, just raw presence. To the world, he was a beast. But to those who looked closer, there was something else. A silence, almost painful, hiding behind his fury. Mike grew up in chaos, in neighborhoods where hope was a stranger and violence was a language everyone understood. He was arrested dozens of times before he turned 13. He didn't believe in love. He believed in survival. Then came Cus D'Amato, the man who saw not a criminal, but a champion in the making. Cus taught him that discipline could be stronger than anger. That boxing was not about hate. It was about control, and for the first time, Mike felt what it meant to be guided, not feared. When Tyson stepped into the ring for the first time as a professional, he wasn't just fighting for victory. He was fighting to prove that he was more than the kid the world had already given up on. And he did. He became the youngest heavyweight champion in history. He made grown men crumble in seconds. The crowd roared his name, "Tyson, Tyson, Tyson!" But deep inside, the same boy still whispered, "Am I enough now?" Section 2. Cracks in the armor, when power isn't enough. Fame came like a storm, fast, loud, and merciless. Every camera wanted his face. Every reporter wanted his words. The world didn't just want to see Mike Tyson fight. They wanted to watch him exist. But fame is a strange kind of opponent. It doesn't hit you with fists. It hits you with temptation, with loneliness. And Tyson, barely in his 20s, was drowning in both. He had money, women, cars, mansions, everything the streets once told him would make him happy. But happiness never came. He would later say, "I was the king, but I didn't even know what that meant." The discipline Cus had taught him began to fade after Cus's death. The man who kept his world balanced was gone, and without that anchor, Mike's rage returned, stronger, hungrier, and blind. The media loved the chaos. They didn't want to see the man. They wanted the monster. And when you're told you're a monster long enough, sometimes you start to believe it. Inside, the cracks began to spread. Fights outside the ring. Betrayals. Wrong people whispering in his ear. He was surrounded by noise, but completely alone. And then came the fall. The loss of his title. The headlines. The trial. The prison. The man who once made the world tremble now sat in a cell, silent, forgotten, broken. But something strange happens when you lose everything. You stop running from the mirror. You start seeing yourself for who you are. Not the image, not the myth, just you. In that silence, behind those bars, Mike Tyson finally faced the only opponent he had never been able to knock out. Himself. Section 3. The public fall. Lessons from rock bottom. The world that once crowned him now turned its back. Headlines that used to glorify his power now fed on his pain. The same cameras that once chased him in victory now hunted him in shame. In prison there were no fans. No lights, no belts, no entourage. Only walls and time. Time to think, to regret, to remember. For the first time in years, Mike Tyson wasn't surrounded by people telling him what he wanted to hear. He was alone with his past. With every punch, every betrayal, every lie he had told himself to survive. He once said, "I had everything, but I was empty." And it was in that emptiness that something began to change. He started reading. He started listening. He started asking questions he had never dared to ask before. Who am I when I'm not fighting? Who am I when the crowd is gone? Behind the walls of that prison, the fighter began to die. But the man started to live. He learned humility, not because he wanted to, but because life left him no other choice. And slowly, the anger that had fueled him began to fade, replaced by something new. Not weakness, not surrender, but acceptance. When he walked out of prison, he wasn't the same man. He didn't roar like he used to. He didn't smile for the cameras. He simply said, "I'm still learning who I am." And that was the beginning of Mike Tyson's real comeback. Not the comeback of the fighter, but the comeback of the human being. Section 4. Rebuilding from the rubble, redemption and peace. When Mike Tyson returned to the ring, the world watched with curiosity, but also with doubt. Could the man who once ruled the world rise again after losing everything? He did fight again. He won some, he lost some. But this time, every punch carried a different meaning. It wasn't about proving his dominance. It was about reclaiming his soul. He was no longer chasing glory. He was searching for peace. And somewhere along the way, he realized that peace doesn't come from victory. It comes from forgiveness. He began to talk openly about his past, his mistakes, his rage, his pain. He didn't hide behind excuses. He faced the truth. And in doing so, he inspired millions who had fallen too. Because the story of Mike Tyson is not about how many times he knocked someone out. It's about how many times life knocked him down, and how many times he got back up. He found love again. He became a father. He laughed at himself, something the old Tyson would never have done. He learned that vulnerability doesn't make a man weak. It makes him human. And when he spoke, his words no longer carried the roar of a fighter, but the calm voice of a man who had finally made peace with his own chaos. He said, "I used to be a gladiator. Now I'm just a man trying to do good." And somehow, those words hit harder than any punch he had ever thrown. Section 5. Beyond the legend, the real victory. Today, when people talk about Mike Tyson, they remember the power, the chaos, the knockouts that defined an era. But those who truly listen hear something deeper. They hear the story of a man who went from rage to reflection, from destruction to redemption. Mike Tyson became a symbol, not of perfection, but of transformation. Because life, like the ring, will always test you. You'll be hit when you least expect it. You'll lose things you thought you could never live without. And sometimes you'll even lose yourself. But if you're brave enough to face that reflection, to admit your faults, to forgive yourself, to stand back up when no one believes you can, then you've already won the fight that truly matters. Tyson's greatest victory wasn't over an opponent. It wasn't a championship belt or a roaring crowd. It was the quiet moment when he learned that strength isn't about domination. It's about control. Control of your emotions, your choices, your destiny. He once said, "The struggle is what makes you great. Without it, you'll never know who you really are." And maybe that's the lesson we all need to hear. That our pain isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning. That no matter how broken, lost, or forgotten we feel, we can rise. Because real power, the kind that lasts, doesn't come from your fists. It comes from your heart. This is not just the story of Mike Tyson, the fighter. It's the story of every one of us, fighting our demons, losing our battles, and still finding the courage to rise again.